Now, I am very happy to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Alan Shark. Dr. Shark is the Executive Director and CEO of the Public Technology Institute, a national organization which focuses on technology issues that impact local government and thought leaders in the public sector. He's the recipient of the prestigious 2012 National Technology Champion Award from the National Association of State Chief Information Officers and the author of 7 Trends That Will Transform Local Government Through Technology, as well as co-author of the book Web 2.0 Civic Media in Action. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alan Shark. Good. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. That was just me. First of all, I want to say thank you for being here. You had a choice this morning. It's like a pilot saying, we know you have a choice flying different airlines. You could have been watching the Pope this morning. The Pope or Alan, and I'm flattered that you chose here. So thank you. Now I have to live up to these high expectations. Now you're probably wondering, I said, uh-oh, there's a problem here. This guy's wearing a jacket. And to me, when you go to a conference like this, especially in New Mexico, which I'm very familiar with, it's like, there are 2 things going on here. 1, he's well over 50, or 2, he's a vendor. And I only fill one of those qualifications. Now, what I can tell you is that this is my travel suit. I wear a suit all the time, or a jacket, only because it has enough pockets for all the stuff that you need to get on and off planes, and that's the only reason why I wear this. I'm not trying to impress anybody, but the airlines are very appreciative, because if it wasn't that, it would be one of those photojournalist vests that when you see somebody traveling with that, you say, he's an American. Whatever country you're in, you know exactly what nationality that person is. So I arrived here yesterday afternoon, and it's good to be back. How many here are from New Mexico? Cool. My daughter graduated from She spent 4 years as undergraduate, and they have a wonderful music program. And as a result, it got her a 2-year scholarship to Yale. And today, I was just chatting with her this morning, she's in China, and she plays for the Macau Symphony. And she owes it all to here. And we had many memorable times in the frontier, by campus, and a lot of other great places. This is a great city, so I'm very happy to be here. The weird part of my life is, as soon as I get here, I'm already getting one of those little reminders saying it's time to check in. And I'm going, wait a minute, where am I? That's my return flight this afternoon. And when I return today, I go through Minneapolis, where I was last Friday, coming back from San Jose from another meeting. And then when I arrive in Minneapolis, waiting for my connecting flight back to Washington, D.C., I'm going to be getting another one for my trip tomorrow night to Helsinki. So I leave at Dulles tomorrow night for Helsinki, and then as soon as I arrive in Washington, I'll get the next one that will remind me it's time to check in for my flight from Helsinki to Oulu for another meeting. And if all goes well, I'll be in Trenton, New Jersey next Friday, thanks to one of your board members who lured me here, and to Trenton next Friday. So it's crazy, but I'm happy to be here. Now, normally I'm asked to talk about technology. And it was mentioned that I have a book. I have a number of books, some of which I've written, some of which I've edited and written. And the 7 Trends probably, at the moment, is the most popular. I have some copies here that at the end, I'll be happy to sign some copies if you like, and buy them half price because you're a NAGW member. But I wanted to do something different. Instead of just talking about technology trends, I thought it would be more interesting to you to talk about something that you're already even more familiar with. In fact, these are the kind of presentations that I hate it when people say, I need to have your presentation 10 days in advance, because I'm always changing, even up to the minute. I probably would have had a picture of me in a split screen with the Pope saying thank you. But I can say that if you look at your program, the title of this little talk was the 10 challenges of citizen-facing communications what every government web manager must muster. But your board member, Jason Huber, said, hey, you know what? We really changed the name. We're web professionals, and I took that to heart. And so this is a change, because that's what you are. Every one of you is a professional playing an incredibly important role, and what bothers me the most is how many local governments and state governments don't get it. They think they get it. So what I'm going to do is review for you what I call the 10 trends. Or 10 challenges. Now, I'm thinking this could be a good book, right? You let me know in the end if you think that might be something that should be more than just a PowerPoint. But I'm going to go through the 10. I'm going to leave you with kind of an action idea. But I don't want to spoil the fun, and I will move on. First of all, some of you may not know about PTI. I'm in my 12th year as a CEO of the Public Technology Institute. Like you, we're a nonprofit, 501c3. And we are headquartered in the greater Washington, D.C. area. We do webinars. See that word web? We do webinars. We do 20 a year, non-commercial. We do research. We have a great awards program. We do a lot of things. Some of you are members of PTI, and we encourage you to check us out for all the things that we offer aside from our books. So, having said that, now some of you might remember this, okay? I actually had to put the year down, circa 1995, and I was excited. I was excited also when AOL would release a new disc in a can. Do you remember that? And that word, "You've got mail." I do that pretty well, right? You've got mail. And I remember I worked with somebody, a colleague at MCI, and we were mystified that you could send an email through a C script and it would arrive within 24 hours, usually. And sometimes, did you get it? No. It was like the early days of CB radio, when everybody had to have one. There were lines of people trying to get one of these things, and then when you got one, you didn't know a damn thing what to say other than, could I have a 1036? I have a time check? You know, something like that. But everyone had to have one. And I remember the excitement of all that, just like today, when we look at all the enhancements of the iPhone 6S. You know, it's a whole new generation here. But I was proud to be a Netscape navigator. I was proud to be on AOL and kind of figuring out the chat groups with curators and moderators listening in and kind of commenting. But it's a new world, right? Now we've got new things that were never contemplated. Now, at my table, we were talking about rotary dial phones. There is a whole generation, maybe some of you sitting here, that's never even seen one other than a picture. And think about 911. If we had thought it through, that 911 would be the way to call the police, we never would have done 911 because you had to take that click and go 9 clicks twice. So it really should have been 111 to call for help. But sometimes we don't know, just like people say today, that IP addresses and IP technology is the worst common communication tool. That if we knew where we would be today, that would be it would just not be the architecture one would choose, but that debate has long since gone. We are stuck with it, we will make the best of it. So now we're dealing with content and all this, so let's talk about these 10 things. And I have left plenty of time for your comments and questions, challenges, and once in a while, someone said, you left out number 11. Hey, that's cool. So, I think when I look at the 10 trends, and I summarize them at the back. And I will make this presentation available to the group here, your staff, so that this can be distributed. It'll be in PDF form, those pesky little formats. But now we're dealing with something very different that didn't exist in the Netscape days. We have to plan for multi-screens. And we do that even in my organization, and recognizing that today, the web comes in all shapes and sizes. And this becomes quite a challenge. Now, of course, Google made it very clear that to be kept within the high ratings that everybody aspires for, those who do not use responsive design are not going to be as well placed or rated. So that kind of forced more people to move more rapidly into responsive design. And that's both good and bad. I've seen some terrible responsive design, where suddenly you are forced into some screens that make no sense whatsoever. And some of these templates are hard to get out of, and so there's a challenge here. But the main point is we have to understand our audiences better and allow more flexibility than ever before, recognizing that there will be people who will never see our message beyond a 3x5 screen. And that's troubling to me, because when I think about that, their message, I want them to see the big picture, literally, And suddenly, we have to understand our audiences, how many people are viewing this on these little tiny screens, and are they getting the message that we want? So we need to do more research in understanding our audience, and that's important because so many folks design things that are absolutely stunning and beautiful and terrifically functional, but they're not really designed for that small screen. And I know a lot of people, that's the only thing they look at. So, number 2, content. This has become a greater challenge than ever before. Content in day one used to be simple. You know, content really, and this whole movement really is an extension of e-government, a term that is used throughout the world to this day, and less so in the United States. We now have dissected it, just like if you talk about technology in other countries, it's usually ICT. In the United States, we take out the word communications or it's just IT. Same thing. And e-government has moved into digital services. It has moved into citizen engagement, all these other magic words that we keep chasing after. And that would be citizen engagement. It would be transparency, open governance, citizen empowerment. Those are magic words, and many politicians running for office love to embellish upon those points. And when they're elected, they kind of abandon you, and they'll come back to that again when they try to get reelected. We also didn't have YouTube, and that's kind of interesting. Talk about Netscape. YouTube has only been around for 10 years. And today, as you know, something like 300 videos are downloaded every minute, that it would be impossible for any human on the planet to view everything that has already been downloaded in our lifetime. And so we have one private company that has become the diary of the world when it comes to video. That to me is absolutely amazing. Who would have known? And where are they putting all that stuff? I've always wondered about storage. As I watch public safety wrestle with where we put all the body-worn camera video feeds, that's never been a problem for Google. It must be nice. So this whole idea of content has expanded with the word video. That V word is kind of interesting because that does have challenges in terms of how we store things, where we store things, and then we have a lot of new add-ons to what it is that we do. And I'm using the word we because I've been working in government with governments for 20 years. I've served as a CIO, CEO, and I deal with the kind of issues that you deal with every single day, including my website at PTI and other places. But I understand now that that the demands are even greater to putting in more video. The current word today is storytelling. How do we tell a story through video or pictures? So we see these things. We have slideshows. We have pictures of elected leaders, and we have videos with lots of messages. And I suspect, and unless someone has it now, we're going to be dealing with video chat as part of an extension of e-government. You know, if HR Block can do it, and you pay a little bit more come tax time, to have a personal individual at the other end giving you advice live and seeing their picture, I see it's just a matter of time before governments are forced into the same thing, which is ironic because everything has moved away to more of a paperless, humanless interface that makes things wonderfully efficient, but there are obviously some trade-offs. So video is probably the new thing that we wrestle with, and that has a lot to do with the kind of devices people have, what they want. And then we have the elected leaders who want to instill upon their big pictures and their slideshows. And I'm amazed sometimes when I see some of the pictures and how much space it takes up. And this is where we have such little control when the mayor, the city manager says, I want my picture bigger. That's never happened to this audience, right? Yeah. And the slideshows, I want a side of myself, I want a front, I want all my members, and I want to be taller than all the other people, regardless of my true height. Photoshop really works there, right? So the whole idea, and the ability to now tune into a meeting, either live, because who really wants to go to a council meeting? I mean, they're long, they can be very contentious. Now I can look at an index, and I can look at what I want after the fact and see, you know, had they changed this regulation having to do with an issue that I was most concerned about. I suspect, and it's already starting to happen, I'll be able to weigh in at a certain period of time and actually come in live through a remote means, and then be part of that meeting if I'm on that schedule, as if I was physically there. So this is a real game changer, this whole idea of video exchange and all the things that come with that. And then we have the whole issue of user-generated content. This is going to be, I think, another area of growth if you're not already doing it. Just like the TV stations, we'd love to see pictures of that fire that devastated your house. We'd love to see pictures of this and that. And I think now governments are doing the same thing by encouraging people to send in their photos. Politicians are. That's actually become a very useful tool to them because it enables them to see where the trouble areas are, especially when it's tied to 311 kind of requests. So, video, all the different machinations of that, and the whole issue of getting user content, getting people to contribute and having a dialogue, I think is a good thing. Democracy really depends upon an educated citizenry. And so to me, anything that engages people at an adult level, which is hard to achieve sometimes, will be useful in trying to, bring the conversation up so that we can understand that people do think differently than we do, and they might actually have some legitimate thoughts. So number 3, search, or I'd like to call it find. In my office, it looks like a professor's office. I do teach at Rutgers. I'm very proud of that. So I have 2 jobs, but they're related because we have this strategic partnership between PTI and Rutgers School of Public Affairs and Administration. In fact, I was teaching the other night remotely, which I do when I'm on the road. And what's interesting there is if you look at my desk, like any professor's desk, you'll just see a pile of papers, which should be reassuring to you. I'm always suspicious of anybody whose office is one of perfection. Because if that's the case, that's what they're doing. They're just moving paper from one place to the other, and it's the illusion, I think, that they are so incredibly organized, and the answer is they are. They're incredibly organized. But can they find anything? Now, can I find anything? No, but I know what it's like to be a human file server, because I know that I have not thrown anything away. It's in my office somewhere. I will find it eventually. And the good news is every time I go through that routine, I will find things that I was trying to find last week. So it's really a great exercise, and it's healthy once in a while. So finding things, storing things is a huge thing, whether it be indexing things for e-discovery purposes. That was a dangerous time when some young lawyer, just think about it, said, why don't we just ask for everything about that particular public employee? And just like we used to do with paper records, now we can do this with all the data, all the emails, all the tweets, and summon that as a means of finding out more about that person, and ideally, hopefully that person would settle the case. That has caused havoc. And it's actually created a whole new opportunity for many businesses to offer that indexing service and then put it in the cloud, which is probably very useful. So to me, there's been a real change in how we search for things and how sophisticated we have to be in doing it. Now, the perils of search, we have to teach our students a better job of searching, how to put a comma, how to put a couple of commas to kind of try to find a word. Even, I'm always amazed, I have a Google search on Alan Shark. And about every 3rd day, I hear about a shark attack. Yes, and here's an example. It's kind of small. 8-year-old reels in 2-foot shark. Now, it's Alan Shark, but I didn't put the quote marks on both sides, so I guess that's where it's my fault. We need to learn to instruct people in how this. And of course, the thing that bothers me the most is these little pesky messages, links that go nowhere. And in the academic world, that's very troublesome because links change. And the worst offender is the federal government. They are absolutely the worst. If you look at the White House and you see something and it's Googled and you go to it, you're going to get a HTTP 404. It's not there. And very often you are just stuck. And I think this frustrates the public more than ever before. And what troubles me is it's like going to a store. If you have a bad experience, chances are you're not going to go back. You might, but if you have a bad experience a couple of times, you're going to go somewhere else. And so I just find that we don't seem to have enough people checking the links because we as a profession have been forced to decentralize many of our operations. Other departments have access and they're putting things in, and therefore very often they're not the ones who are checking things as you might and would and should. So we need to do a better job, and that is something that I hear among many public folks that say, I keep searching, and 1 out of 3 times I'm going to hit what I really want. And then the other complaint I hear, and I have no answer for this, is just this whole idea of navigation and buttons. Should they be pulled down? Should they be colorful? And do we like submenus or not? And to me, the common wisdom keeps changing. But when I look at these 10 big challenges, it's ongoing. We're always looking for a better way to portray things. And when you think about buttons, look at what Windows did, or Microsoft. Just when you thought nothing could be done differently with buttons, they have animation going inside them. They have them moving around, as in Windows 8.1 and Windows 10, and it makes for a very interesting kind of visual impression in terms of things. And again, it's all about attracting folks and helping them find the places that they need to be, and more importantly, helping them land there to their satisfaction. And there's more on that coming up. Number 4, message management. This is kind of like what it used to be, being a headline newspaper person. And many of you have kind of moved up the ranks through PR and probably did a county newsletter of some kind or a city newsletter. And the big issue at the time was insert your headline here. In the early stages of web and web design, the biggest fight was what was on the front page headline. And if you look at some of the earlier sites, if you go to the Wayback Machine, I'm sure you know about that, where you can look back, even at your own site, maybe 10 years ago, as I did recently, to look at some of the old sites I had been part of and helped design. It's amazing to see how some of them used to be 2 columns, now 3, and now a combination of all sorts of different ways of portraying information. But the challenge of getting news and information on a major website is daunting, because it's never ending. So we're forced to put everything on a homepage. And worse, we're forced to maintain multiple sites as one means. So it's like having multiple newspapers. How many manage more than one site? How many manage more than 3 sites? How many manage more than 4 sites? You're underpaid. Okay. Amen. All right, we have number 11, underpaid. There we are. So I look at examples like New York City in terms of what's going on here. A very big picture of a very large mayor. He's one of the tallest mayors we've ever had in the country. Even I would have to look up to him like that. But there's a lot of information, and this is just kind of a subpage. And then we have the wonderful bear in Denver, which is kind of creepy, but looking over the convention center. And all the information, beautiful website, they've won many, many awards. And yet you can see how things are organized both in the top and the bottom. Really cool, and of course, being in Albuquerque, I don't know, when I saw this picture, it was so pleasant. This is not the Albuquerque I'm used to, but it looks really nice. So if I was a tourist, I'd feel great, but lots of information, very, very clean, and a lot of quick links that get you to where you want. But again, the differences and the variations are unbelievable. We don't seem to have standards that say, we really need to have something that informs the public what's going on. And should that be the role of the website? And I'd like to have a dialogue with you as I end, because that is a question that is unanswered. It used to be that local governments would have newsletters, they could send it out, and they would say, that's our way of communicating. It used to be there were a lot of independent newspapers that would carry real news and go under real journalism and have real standards. Those things are gone. We don't normally do e-letters, although sometimes we do, but they're like mini static websites. With very little opportunity for anybody to kind of voice any kind of communication back, although there's usually a site somewhere at the back of that. The independent newspapers are largely gone. They're far more commercialized, and if something bad happens, that will make the headlines. If something good happens, it'll be on page 8. So in this case, there's a real interesting crisis of how government interacts with their public. And sharing good news, not just bad news. Information about transportation, information about new things that are going on, new zoning, election information, school information, tons of stuff. And there's a question, we are overloaded, and that's where it comes to message management. And so it almost beckons for infographics and quicker means of getting people to where they want to go as a true entry portal for getting information. And City of Boston has done a good job with that. So that we could spend a lot of time just talking about that, but the key thing here is, should the website, the main page, really be the place to begin looking at what are the latest things and where's the information and how easy is it to get to it? Because we seem to have so many competing interests, hence many websites. Now the number 5, we're only halfway through here, is really the rise of apps. Now when the iPhone came out, which was just a couple of years ago, 2007, and when the iPhone 6 just came out, the 6S rather, it is the 9th rendition since 2007. And when Apple invented that phone, the patent actually says it's a handheld computer, not a phone. Can you imagine being Nokia or being Motorola at that day? When you ruled the world, sales were yours. And you had the StarTech, you had all sorts of great devices, and all of a sudden this little smartphone came out. In the end of the first year of the iPhone, there were 500 apps. That was it, 500 apps. But that was a lot, considering there were 0 before it really began. The iPad would come out in 2011, and the story was quite different and continues to this day. So I always say, tongue-in-cheek here, it was apt to happen, right? Today, 2015, Apple celebrates 100 billion download with over 1.6 million apps. By 2013, Google not to be outdone, with its Android operating system, 75% of all app downloads were for Android devices, 1.5 million apps available. And right now, I think it's clearly a tie, and it might weigh out to Android, but there seems to be a resurgence of people who have been a little frustrated or going back to the iOS infrastructure. But now all of a sudden, you can go to the Apple Store and see apps for the White House, FEMA, USA Jobs, Federal Reserve, NASA, IRS, EPA. And in fact, a couple of years ago, IRS got a Best App Award for being very friendly to citizens and being very informative by getting basic information, allowing people to download basic forms. So they did a good job. So again, you can see the rise of apps, number of apps available in terms of operating systems as of July 2015. So we're talking about millions and millions of apps, which is why some of these devices are the device of choice for many citizens. And we find that many city councils and county commissioners have said, we don't want these desktops anymore. We certainly don't want these laptops. We want to have the pads. We want some kind of device. And of course, the hybrid, some of these convertibles are doing a nice job of kind of serving as a bridge. I'm thinking in particular of the Surface Pro or the Surface 3 even as being interesting substitutes. So this has now moved into the city-county thing. I was involved with what has been the first ever project in which a university, which was mine, built an app for the city, in this case the city of Newark, and we're supporting it for 4 years. We're paying for the whole thing. And so now all of a sudden cities have apps that do all sorts of things that what were used to be done and performed by web folks, web professionals. And what I find interesting is when we developed this, we were working with the chief information officer. We were not working with any web professional. And when it was launched, it was very difficult to get the web folks to realize that there needs to be some interface between the two. Even though there was a dynamic link, there was no communication, and there was this big void. And I think this void still exists to this day. So while the folks in Newark have a great app, there's some questions in terms of how it is managed and how it was actually put together, and maybe there are some lessons to be learned here as we rush into doing all these different apps, because if they're not coordinated by somebody, and it shouldn't be the chief technical officer, regardless of title, somebody has to be involved with content across the lines. I know many of you here, your primary focus is content, and I wonder aloud if you have really the authority to start looking at other areas of government, and if not, who is? And I don't see having a content manager just for apps, a content manager. Somehow this message or this governance has to be kind of tied together. So when I look at some of this, I also see the need for interactivity, and this is on the positive side. If you see something tweet something, and I think we're seeing more governments encouraging that kind of behavior. And something that I've been saying in many of the public safety groups that I address, I've been saying this for 4 years among deaf ears until recently. If you see something, send something. Don't just say, send something. But here I was at an APCO conference, which is your public safety communications people, and a special high-level meeting for chiefs. And we were talking about social media and the future of public safety communications with the public. And we were talking about this subject, and it was interesting to hear a chief get very, very upset, red-faced, and said, I'm tired of these young people sending me pictures because we can't accept pictures. It's got to be 911. They need to call 911. They're wasting valuable time. They need to call 911. And I said, wait a minute. I understand your frustration. I said, and we're going to wait for next generation 911. Well, if he's going to wait, that's another 10 years off before we have a unified set of standards for that. And I'm talking to the best and the most hopeful of people. But I also know the best police departments have a social media person that's monitoring stuff, monitoring Twitter, they're monitoring feeds, and some of them are very, very sophisticated that are part of the PSAP, that they're really part of the process. So now the state police in 3 states, Pennsylvania and Virginia, I believe Georgia, are now encouraging and have apps to do that. If you see something, send something, because in many cases the public today are the first responders to a fire, a car crash, some kind of disaster. They're there first, and they want to be helpful. They're taking very, very valuable pictures. Lat and long is part of that, so they're getting all the information if it's to be recovered. So I think it's very important. And the interesting thing about apps, now even governments have their own app stores. USA.gov, interesting source for information for the federal government. We can learn a lot by looking at their website and seeing all the variations of apps across all the different government agencies. In fact, a year and a half ago, the White House issued a directive to all of the 75 federal agencies saying that if you have a citizen-facing function, you are to develop at least 2 apps, develop 2 apps to interface with the public. This is a presidential order. Now, of course, not all of those federal agencies have citizen-facing kind of applications, but for those who do, they were basically mandated to develop apps. So there's been a growth in the federal government of apps that the public can use. So we do have a U.S. government app store, and many local governments, like the District of Columbia, has their own app store too. So that leads me to number 6, social and civic media. Now, in some sense, these numbers of categories of things that I'm talking about are things that interrelate. They're not separate. They're all kind of a whole bunch of concentric circles. And so when we deal with social media, the public is kind of, well, here's the best way to say it, and you've heard this before. If Facebook was a nation, they would be number 3 in the world for population. They've just reached just over 1 billion active users. And that is followed, by India, number 2, and China, number 1. Of course, they have physical boundaries, but we're talking about digital boundaries. And it makes me amazed when I hear of all the talk about how we have to worry so much about security and securing our borders, which I fully agree. I'm not making light of that. But to me, the greatest threat to this country is our digital borders. When we have over 5 million federal employees have their fingerprints stolen, 20 million records taken, and that's just the beginning, let alone citizens' credit cards, numbers, information. It is very unsettling. These are digital borders, and we almost need a digital border patrol. And I've heard nobody talk about that. So I'm running for president. And that's going to be it. So, back to the serious stuff. So for the public, there are people, 19% of Americans are not they're not engaged at all. 19% of Americans, and everybody thinks, oh, just the poor. No, actually the poor do have devices. It used to be the poorest of the folks in most communities, the thing that they would have to have is a car, and it's still important, but the biggest thing they have is a cell phone. So they do have equipment. I did a study for the United Nations on on e-government. In fact, overseas it's called m-government for mobile government. We found places in India and other poor parts of the world, in Africa and elsewhere, do an amazing job with simple messaging systems, SMS, where they can accomplish amazing things just by SMS. So you don't have to have all the color kind of stuff on the screen. So anyway, the point is we have a lot of choices. 19% of Americans still do not. And very often what that is A, they haven't seen the benefit. I've always said nobody buys a computer or phone to talk to government because that never worked for my mother who was 85. They're not going to buy it even though we paid for it. My mother, who was then 85 years old, she finally did it, started using it not for government, but because that was a way for her to see her grandkids. And you can imagine how painful it was for someone, impatient person like me, trying to teach her how to use a mouse. First of all, the term really freaked her out, didn't like the word mouse at all. That was just, and she was so much larger than a mouse. I never got that. Number two, the first time she went like this and shoved all the glassware and everything that was in front of her. And then I had to stop and think, wait a minute, oh, okay. It's not your arm, it's just your wrist that you move. So once she did that, she was able to communicate with members of the family at different parts of the world, but never used it really for government until the end when the federal government said, we are no longer going to send out IRS forms to 60 million people every year. Now you're going to download it. And you're going to be lucky if you find it in a post office, which is where you used to be able to find it. The federal government also said, we're not going to send you checks anymore by mail. We're going to deposit money in your checking account, or we're going to give you a debit card, unless there's some exception. So in many ways, the role of government is to try to coerce people, good or bad, to adapt to behaviors that saves money, because they've saved millions upon millions of dollars and not having to print checks. So I mention that because I still am concerned about the 19% of the Americans. Some of them are in senior homes. There's no one there to teach them. I think there should be a senior corps, a digital senior corps, that'll also be on my presidential campaign, that goes to senior homes and hospitals and helps people engage and communicate and empower them for what's available to everybody else. It's a big issue. So, having said that, every website I see looks similar. You have all these different kind of things at the bottom, and I wonder sometimes how often they're updated. There's nothing more troubling when it comes to content is when you look at something, you go to the press room, and you see the last press release was April 2009. And then you wonder why, and I see that a lot. I see that as often on corporate sites as I do on government sites. Often the reason is that somebody else was responsible for it and has moved on, and nobody understood what that is. And that's where another thing I talk about, kind of a side thing here, is called knowledge management. Because the turnover rates are going to increase much more in the coming years, because the millennials coming in, and they are wonderful, they're also different, they're not going to spend 10, 12, 15, 20 years, as many of you here in the room have spent. And that doesn't mean they don't like you. In fact, most surveys I've read, they do like you. They like working for you. It's great, but their horizon is different. They may want to stay in the same area or move somewhere else, but their goal is to learn and move on maybe 2 to 3 years. Now, think about all the different passwords and people responsible for different parts of web management that might go unattended because everyone just got into a comfort zone that it was being handled by somebody who was there. So knowledge management is a conscious discipline of capturing data and workflow so that if somebody else was to leave, somebody else coming in to fill a position has a sense of what needs to be done and at what time frame. So we've moved into this interesting area now to add more to our plate that's already quite full. Open data, transparency, citizen engagement. These are some really big words that many politicians talk about. And really, it's about information, openness, and interaction. Those really are the things that I think are your primary drivers, because I always say, a lot of times people come to a meeting like this and they said, I saw your site, how did you do it? And I say, that's not the right question. I mean, you should find out first, why did you do it? Because to me, the why is as important as the how. You have to figure out, what are my objectives? Why am I doing it? Because every jurisdiction has its differences, and you may want to say, okay, I see why you did it. That helps me to figure out, I might want to do something very similar, but differently. So when we look at this, I look at connecting people with data. Now, the early data scientists, and this is a hot growing area for those of you who have kids in school and saying, what should I do when I grow up? I'm still wrestling with that myself. Is data scientists is a big deal. People are looking for data scientists in the corporate world, the government world, big time. But the whole idea of data initially was, if I can just publish data and put it on a data portal, somebody will build a web for us. And that kind of has evaporated. I remember meeting with a data officer of a major city, not Philadelphia. And I said, why are you doing this? He said, the mayor wanted me to, and I'm so excited. So good. He said, it took me 2 years to get all this data, this really garbage, and get it to a publishable form and put it on the site. Great, what's it going to be used for? Well, that's not my responsibility. And I don't get it. To me, data is something that you don't wake up in the morning and say, I wonder how my city's data is today. We just don't do that. We have other things that we're dealing with. But if there's a way to harness this information and get it to the right people with the goal of better data decisions, data-driven management is where we need to be, and therefore publishing this data is indeed important. Number 7, e-government and digital services. Now, this is the less social part of interacting with the government. We do have all these forces coming together, and the newest thing launched by the government in 2014 was the United States Digital Service with a moniker and a badge right there in the gold. How cool that the U.S. Digital Service. Maybe the state of New Mexico should have the State of New Mexico Digital Service, and maybe some of the other states in Minnesota should have a Digital Service Corps. Because this is taking e-government to the next level and saying we have to take a more systematic approach in communicating with our citizens, because that's our goal. It's no longer hours of operation. Yes, we take your credit card. Yes, you can get your license. Yes, you can find out the hours of operation or sign up for a ball field. We've evolved. This is a new calling. We now have to both facilitate and stand up to professional standards, to when people say, I think this will be good. And this gets into this thing called metrics, which we'll get to. So it's very complicated. When we look at e-government, we have apps, we have social media, we have the web, we have 311, the new entree into this. What's interesting about 311, it was invented by the FCC at a time when we still had rotary dial phones. And they had no idea that the shift that would occur from dial-up to mobile phones to now most websites actually have a 311 button that someone can click on and then take them to where they need to be. I've got a lot of great stories there, but this is interrelated because most people will come to 311 through an app or through a website. Now, in New York City, they get 50,000 calls a day, and most of those are still by a telephone. That's changing, and I've seen the numbers, but right now, yes, people still will call, but the next generation are going to come in through the portals, all those little screens and stuff. So when we see it, it almost begs for a integrated plan between mobile, web, and how you integrate things from smarter, leaner, faster. And this is happening in many, many places. This happens to be the city of Sacramento 311. And they really call it a unified way of doing business. But again, when I talk to the 311 people, they seem to be in another department. And the web professionals seem to be over here, and I worry again about this interface and lost opportunities. You know, most people, when it comes to technology, will say to you, I didn't know that was possible. And this goes back to the Donald Rumsfeld great quote, answering a different question. He said, I didn't know what we didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And most people, when it comes to technology, really, in a nice way, don't know what is possible. And that's why I always tell people in the GIS communities and other communities is we need to educate people. Did you know you can tell a story better? Did you know this is something that could be done? And you can tell them a story by showing them websites and or features done by other communities. And that is a real effective way to get people to support the things that you think is right. The other thing is coming to conferences like this. This is a great association. Now, I speak at a lot of meetings throughout the year, and I have to say this is one of the best organized meetings I've seen in a very, very long time. Your board is very, very engaged, and this is a great opportunity to share and look and show and tell and see, because there's so many issues, as you see here. But 311 is a real enabler in terms of things that you can do, and how can we help you, because this has become the new portal of help when it comes to e-government. How many people here are directly involved with 311 activities in your local governments? Wow, very few. How many would like to be? Okay, I'll talk to you later, those who don't want to be part of it. I think you should. I think there's something good here. That'll be my next lecture after the break. Okay, the other thing we have to be careful of when it comes to e-government or digital services is payments. We have some changes underway. Credit card industry finally is waking up to the fact that they had horribly insecure credit cards. Now they're embedded with chips. New terminals will be required by law. And now with Apple Pay and Google Pay, and then now the new thing, Bitcoin. Does anybody accept Bitcoin yet? Not yet. You will. A year from now, somebody will be taking Bitcoin. That is becoming something that is being taken seriously, an online currency of sorts. The federal government, even the US Treasury, is now accepting Bitcoin transactions. Pretty amazing. So stay tuned. This is coming. And then finally, when it comes to digital services, in the old days, petitions for government looked like this. You'd fill out a petition, and you would sign it, and you deliver it to the politician, hopefully for action. Today, we have experiments such as We the People. And I wonder how many of you have looked at this and have thought maybe this would be cool for our communities as well. What this means is that there is a process, and they're still learning, because when they came out with We the People, a way to engage citizens and ask them for, if there's a group that is large enough to have an issue, we must by law, we're going to hold ourselves to this, respond by so many days to your request. Whether we follow through or not, we are going to respond to this. But they had a very low threshold. Not good for e-services, because it can easily be manipulated by a very active group. Now, if you go on this site and post one, they'll say, here are issues that are currently being discussed. So instead of reinventing the wheel, you have an index of seeing what issues. Can you imagine the first issue for this great, great site was from a group that was fighting for the national legalization of pot? That didn't go over very well. All right, that's not going to be in my campaign. I can see that. So anyway, so they raised the bar to like $250,000. I think now it's 250,000. So you get that many people. And then the second big one was after a flap with Justin Bieber, there was a whole thing to deport him back to Canada. That'll be in my plank. Okay. So the point is, Americans, we're fickle. I agree. And we're experimenting with this, but what a great opportunity to learn from some of the experiences of We the People. It's the right direction, ultimately. We have to find a way to get greater accountability, and we have to have a better way so that it cannot be manipulated just by one single cause, by one very active group that doesn't represent the population. Now, in both cases, they did respond. They did respond saying, this is not the course of the federal government. This does not meet the criteria for deportation. It is still a federal law. It's up to Congress to change the laws about legalization of marijuana. Number 8, moving along, is performance measurement and improvement. Now, with all the things that we have, I'm amazed how many people are not utilizing the built-in metrics that exist within, in particular, social media. My organization, PTI, we did a survey about 3 years ago, and that survey essentially said, how many people are using social media metrics that are built in? How many people, let me ask you here, how many people are using the built-in metrics to see how well your social media is doing? Okay, quite a few, but not all. So 87% 3 years ago said we're not doing it, and we were surprised. But luckily we asked the follow-up question, why not? Number one reason. No, they knew, well, maybe, but they didn't, that was not one of the choices, not know about it. The number one reason is I'm too darn busy. My plate is full, I'm busy, I don't have time to take on something else. Number 2, I was unaware, I've not been trained, that's what it was. Number 2 was I was not trained, but number 3 is really scary. No one asked me for it. No manager above me asked me for this information or data. It tells me a lot of managers at the high end are unaware that these kind of tools exist, and they're really important. Now, I'm running out of time a little bit because I've got a few more to go through, but I just want to share with you what data comes out of this stuff. Now, Montgomery County, which is outside of Washington, we do a lot of work, one of our members, they can look at average time to reach a 311 representative is 19.7 seconds. Customer satisfaction is 79%, and I'll get to it how they know this. Cost per customer contact, $3.60. Now that price is low because they're pushing people more online than they are to the personal phone call kind of stuff. Web portal utilization, 9.5 of all service requests. And again, I'll make this presentation available to all you. There's 3.5 million users a year. 70% are new, 30% are returning. It gives you information about how long they spent in a session, how many page views, and it tells you the kind of devices. Desktop, 69%, mobile, tablet, 31%, and that latter, the mobile trends, that's going up every single year. Now, New York City, they've got a bigger budget. They start getting into some really good infographics about how well they do. This is something they share with the public to show them how responsive they are or trying to be. And it's good politics when you start seeing the numbers in terms of how these things are going up, whether it be tweets and texts and all the other things in this. The whole idea of total service requests that are filed by the different kinds, by borough, by area. Politicians love it, especially if you can bring it down to the locality and they can see where the trouble spots are because they love to interface. Number 9. Governance and compliance. The rules for compliance is unbelievable. You have Section 508. You have a question also, who decides? This question is unresolved to this day. One place, if you haven't seen it, if I've done nothing more to give you some new ideas, take a look at digital.gov. Now, it looks kind of interesting. It's a very easy site to navigate, very open, airy, and you wouldn't know that this is a government website run by the General Services Administration. They have a great checklist of requirements for federal websites and digital services. But I'm seeing more and more many states are tying their codes to the federal government, especially in terms of 508 requirements. So, this is a good place to look as a reference, but when you start looking at some of the things in terms of relevant law, regulation, or policy, I was blown away by the amount of stuff that is on there. The standards, the laws, and to make it simple, I've identified 27 of the 28 separate listings that are listed on this website that give the appropriate citations in government law right to the point of where you need to be. Anywhere from accessibility, analytics, and federal governments are required now to have analytics, content information quality, copyright, customer service, digital service, domains and branding, FOIA, freedom of information, governance, how you link, how you address mobile usage, multiple websites, multilingual websites, which is becoming a big trend as well. Linking, mobile, multilingual, I got that twice, sorry. Paperwork reduction, performance measurement and reporting, plan reporting, privacy. And it moves right on to records management, required contact search. And each one of these are somewhat different, even though they sound similar, and they all have laws. So I tell you, that's a good place to go. So the question is, who's in charge? Is it the CIO? And if I asked, I think there would be different responses. Is it the city manager? Is it PIO? Is it the social media specialist? Is it the web manager? That's the big question, and I don't have answers, but to me, this is where there is both a crisis and an opportunity. We have all these outlets going to the public. All these people are seeing these screens, at least those who are somewhat engaged. And the question is, who's in charge? And what are we going to do about it? And that leads me to number 10, totally self-serving. I think, based on my understanding of the organization, and the opportunities that I see before you, I think there's a real need for professional development and recognition programs. Now, the recognition programs kind of are out there already, and I think the other groups can help do more to publicize the things that you're doing and serve as a demonstration for others. So by example, the partnership between Rutgers School of Public Affairs and Administration and PTI have created a certification program for CIOs. Right now, we operate 2 classes, one in the West and one in the East. In March, we will have a new one in the West and a new one in the East. And we accept people who are aspiring to be professionals in the field of technology leadership and technology management. It's been a very successful program offered by 3 universities, not just us. University of North Carolina School of Government, and Florida State University through their Florida Institute of Government. And we have a consortium that PTI serves as the hub. So the programs are very similar. The reason why I mention it, consider this. Wouldn't it be cool if you had a Certified Public Engagement Manager certification? Wouldn't it be cool to have that after your name? Or a Certified Public Engagement Professional, even better. Or a Public Engagement Professional certificate, a Certified Digital Communications Officer, or other. Now, I'm just throwing these out for you to contemplate and think about as an organization. We would never do this without a partnership without your organization. But in my mind, one of the things that I see in terms of answering that issue of who's in charge and governance is to make sure people realize we're not just that little web manager down the hall like the librarian. That we play an active role in citizen communications, and we should be. And to have a program with rigor, it spans usually a year. And I have to tell you, certification begs for recertification, meaning that like a lawyer, like a doctor, airline pilot, any professional, or a CPA, certified public accountant, you would have to have points during the years. Usually every 3 years you have to be recertified, which is how we do it for our program. So this would be a professional development tool that hopefully will enhance what you do, let alone hopefully learn from each other as a cohort group and learn all the different things. And a lot of what we do is online. We're not talking about residency. We're talking about most of this is online with maybe 3 visits to a university campus, one end of the coast or the other. So I just throw this out. I wouldn't do all of these. I might do one with you, but it's just a thought in terms of, would this help you in your standing within the government? Would this help you in justifying travel to attend meetings out of state other than this or just this? So that you have the ability to say, hey, I have to maintain my certification. I have to be recertified. Everyone else does that. Why not you? Now, if it turns out that a certificate program is a better way to start, great. Certificate programs are easier. In some cases, they're no less rigorous. It just means you don't have to be recertified. It's like having a college degree. Once earned, that's it for life. They all serve purposes. And I wanted to leave you with that thought of something that is possible. So, one more thing, when I say be recognized, if you can't get a raise, be recognized. We at PTI have a citizen engaged community program. You can be a designated city. Elected leaders love this, but you can look to our website and see more about that. And we have a whole bunch of awards. Web 2.0, we have a GIS award, all sorts of things. And then we have a very, very exhaustive technology savvy program and for cities and counties. And this is like a 6-page document that you have to fill out. And then you get to have this emblem on your website or elsewhere. So the 10 challenges, multi-screens, the challenge of content, the art of search, message management, the rise of apps, social and civic media, e-government and digital services, performance measurement and improvement, governance and compliance, and the need for professional development and recognition. Now, one more thing. I mentioned that Montgomery County was able to measure its success. They're spending $70,000 a year, more than most of you might have. They're a very rich county, but they're using 4C that has those little floating things that float around and ask you how well they're doing. That's how they get their information to rate their sites. There are many companies that do that, and they really take that data very, very seriously in terms of measuring and tracking their performance over time. So that's how they're doing it. Many cities are turning to these different companies, outside firms, so that they really have some good data. And we at PTI have lots of resources in terms of books. The 7 Trends book is available, I guess, during break. I will be happy to sign some for you by the registration area, if anybody interested. We have Smart Cities book. We have the Civic Media in Action. All these books are available on Amazon. The newer ones are available as an e-reader. One last thing, we have a newsletter that goes out every Wednesday. It's free. Just go to our website and sign up for it. It's a snapshot of technology from the best sources throughout the country that we're aware of. So it's a nice, quick read. It's a page and a half, but it's got a lot of information on it. That's me. I'm not running for president. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have time for questions,
Yes.
if anybody would like.
Or disagreements.
That. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, thank you for your presentation. How do you see governments organizing themselves in order to accomplish what you're talking about? These 10 points are they're very ambitious. The government has to have the money to do these things and has to have the political will and decision making to organize its staff in order to do these. So where do you see governments headed with their internal organization?
Very good question. First of all, I think many of the things I'm talking about are being done. They're just not organized. So, if one is starting and doesn't have it, that could have a price to it. But it's sometimes better not to have it than have it done badly. So, therefore, there's an opportunity to do it right from the beginning. It really starts with a plan. I mean, it sounds kind of basic, but, again, I go back to the why. What is our strategic purpose? To me, successful governments of the future are going to do a better job at engaging their citizens beyond just, here's a picture of our leaders and a phone number and office hours. To me, and I think city managers see that more and more, they just need to know how. Number two, I don't think it's that expensive. I think there's a lot of people here that are on the vendor side that will show you how to do a website, how to pay for it over time, and have it refreshed, whether it's cloud or teaming with somebody. I don't think it's terribly expensive. The biggest cost is going to be in human talent. And they've got to come to meetings like this. They've got to be trained. They've got to be kept current. And someone's got to recognize that. And the next point I would make on that is they've got to realize how important it is and assign somebody who is senior to oversee it. Now, it could be the public information officer, or it could be an assistant city manager, which is the way it is often split up, or an assistant county manager or a deputy, depending upon the size of the jurisdiction, who has that area in mind. Not just Parks and Rec, but whoever has the technology piece should be the one that is partnering with you. So to me, this is not a big dollar item. To me, the most important thing is to sell them on the concept that dealing with the citizens is really important. And you know what? Politicians love that. Not always. Now, I have to say, especially in New Jersey, I remember times not that long ago where many people said, we like the way it is. We don't want to go public. It works. It's good. Hopefully that is changing. I think it is. So there will be people who see this as a threat. I think the new dynamic leader of the future is going to embrace this and be your best ally.
Anybody else? Cool.
Hi, my name is Craig. I'm from Tacoma Park, Maryland, inside Montgomery County, and I have a small disagreement with you.
Good.
We actually use Montgomery County, Maryland's main website, the one with Ike Leggett up front, as the benchmark of what we don't want to do. And we're finding often that us as we're like the little city inside, we're like a little fiefdom inside this big monolithic county. And my question for you would be, they often treat us as a policy alpha lab. Like we do something and then 2 months later, the county comes out with this idea that, oh, this is this great new idea. And we've been doing it for months successfully. How would you recommend us little fish that are inside these monolithic organizations one step up deal with that?
We're stilts. Now, this relates back to the first question. I think, just like PTI and your organization are basically small organizations that are largely volunteer-driven with a professional staff, to me, you have more opportunities, as you alluded to be more creative and to change quickly. If something doesn't work, colors don't work, size doesn't work, you can change it. They are very bureaucratic. They have hundreds of people in their IT department. They're still not up to speed where I think they should be with GIS. You know, they still show maps. They don't have a way to locate how you get there from point A to point B. There's a lot of things missing. So to me, as long as you allow them to be in the driver's seat, I'm just talking politically, you will be treated the way you are. What might be interesting is for you to work with Rockville and others, smaller jurisdictions maybe throughout the state, to have your own group that works with them. So it's kind of like organize and be equal as opposed to be small and be picked off. I don't think they would object to that. In fact, you would make their job easier if you organize some kind of a group that would work directly with them so that it's not just these individuals, it's now more organized to recognize some of the needs of the smaller jurisdictions, because they're not a typical organization by any means.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Question over here?
Question?
The front here.
I was just curious about, you said that you guys had done the app for Newark,
Yes.
and I was curious how that's been going, because we've sort of been in a conversation in my city in Texas about whether we want to do an app and have to then gain that new following, or just figure out ways to really improve upon the website's mobile applications.
You know, that's a really good question, because many of the discussions that occurred were before responsive design. And responsive design is a game changer in the sense that it really does a decent job. If you look at our website, PTI, it took me a while to get used to it, but it does a very good job of giving everything I need in a format for a small screen. So some people say, why should I go through the expense and the redundancy? The real question is, what would be the most attractive to your students? So it's not you, it's really from the citizen point of view. What would be something that they would be more apt to use? And I think that's got to be the major thing. I don't think app development is that expensive. Now, to your specific question, is the Newark app working? Most of it is, but the part that's working is the part that Rutgers is constantly updating. We have a cultural line, we have websites to the university, we have all sorts of updated stuff on transportation, we make sure the links are always good. What we're seeing also is the city is not responding to some of the complaints, because they have a whole area where you take a picture of something, if you see something, say something, and they're taking pictures, and it could go for days, and it's troubling us. So the city, the people who are trying to take these trouble calls are not being as responsive as they should. So if you don't have the bandwidth for people to actually fulfill it, then you're going to have a nice app that's sitting there that's going to frustrate people. So it's really all about, now to me, the ideal thing is the same people deal with both, but that's not the way it was planned. And I think the web folks, the communication folks, were an afterthought, and that's not good. So I believe in apps, because to me, the push of a button is really kind of where it's going to be, as I think tablets are going to rule more and more. And I think it's worth the effort, and call it an experiment, call it a pilot, but make sure that the right people are involved and they understand what their ongoing responsibilities are going to be.
Any more questions?
No, they want coffee break.
Yeah.
Coffee break. Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.